Are you afraid of the dark? Perhaps you're afraid of something even scarier than the dark. The faint blue glow of a computer screen. Maybe a desktop computer in the family room? Because you're logged on to an internet forum in 2001 and you've just seen a post about Ted the Caver. Ted and his friend exploring a mysterious cave, and at the end of the story, you think Ted has died, and now you're going to have nightmares about spelunking for years to come. You've just stumbled on a creepypasta. Hi y'all, today I wanted to unpack one of my favorite little internet goodies, creepy stories. Yeah, we're talking about the creepypasta. Humor me for a second. Can you think back to your first creepy chain email you ever received? Maybe it said something like, "My name is Jenny and I was murdered with a butcher knife. And if you don't send this to 3 friends in 10 minutes, I will come to your room in the middle of the night and murder you with a butcher knife." Or something like that. I mean, maybe it's a little less threatening, but I remember them being pretty threatening. And it's not like your bestie from 4th period like sat at the computer in her parents' room and typed up that email. I mean, maybe she did, in which case I hope she became a successful writer and learned a little bit more about character building other than saying something like, "My name is Jenny." You might also remember getting a chain email like the one where Jenny comes to murder you in the middle of the night if you don't forward her spam. This outcropping of internet horror content, beginning with things like chain letters, eventually became what we know today as the creepypasta. So what is a creepypasta? It's a portmanteau of creepy and copy and paste, which is also a portmanteau for copypasta. Basically, it's a portmanteau of portmanteaus, okay? And it's used to describe pieces of text that can be copied and pasted around the internet into different forums and social media platforms to shock, terrify, and entertain readers. The creepypasta is a unique subgenre of horror, taking on its own identity as a result of the medium of exchange being the World Wide Web. Many believe that creepypasta originated on the forum site 4chan. Now, if you're not familiar with 4chan, that's good. You don't need to know much about it. It's probably better this way. If you are familiar with 4chan, you know it was at least at some point in history a pretty unfiltered cesspool of anything people were willing to anonymously type with their Cheeto-dusted fingers. Unlike a traditional social networking site like MySpace, which was around at the time, or even Instagram and Twitter the way we use them now, 4chan was largely anonymous, and that's what made it the perfect internet community for horror concepts to spawn, spook, and spread. You see, even today's internet culture, so much of content success depends on building a personal brand. But in the early anonymous forum days, the content itself had to be representative of something compelling, something people wanted to interact with and share. Creepypastas were the perfect text-based viral entity. It could stand on its own, it could be shared in many places, and it spoke to humanity's most potent feelings: shock, fear, and maybe a little bit of sick delight. Okay, so it wouldn't be a creepypasta video if I didn't go over some well-known creepypastas, and it wouldn't be me if I didn't unpack them in like a literary sense. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for paying for school, because that's what I learned. Like I mentioned in the intro, one of the earliest creepypasta stories that gained widespread popularity is a story known as Ted the Caver. This creepypasta takes the form of a series of blog posts that Ted shared on his Angel Fire page in 2001. Shout out if you remember Angel Fire. On this Angel Fire blog, Ted is detailing an event in which he and his friend Brad start exploring a cave they found close to their home. When they enter the cave, they find a narrow passageway with a small hole, and they begin to drill in order to explore further. The blog documents the strange things that happened around Ted and Brad, and later some third guy named Joe. So Ted, Brad, and Joe are our 3 main characters. They basically encounter a screaming, unnatural wind and unexplained hieroglyphs within the cave. The blog posts abruptly end with the final post detailing strange happenings among the 3 cavers throughout the weeks following their encounter in the cave. So the guys agree to go back to the cave for closure and are never heard from again. The blog is never updated, and the men are assumed to have been consumed by the cave and its mysterious paranormal aura. So it's a pretty simple story. I love that this creepypasta is in the form of a series of blog posts. It's almost like a meta-textual commentary on the idea of blogs and the voyeurism inherent in reading about someone else's life online. What do you do if they encounter a creepy cave and that cave suddenly makes them disappear? Are you as an audience responsible for that happening? Should you tell anyone? How do you know it's real? Sure, you could tell this story by saying something like, my cousin knew this guy named Ted, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that the audience for this story is consuming the story in the format of a blog that feels like it's coming from the main character, so good. Of course, this story gives us all a good spook about what the heck could be in random nooks and crannies of the wilderness, but I think it's about even more than that. Once this story spread onto the National Speleological, I think it means people who go into caves, the National Speleological Society's message board, other posters pitched in and commented that they had known Ted, that they'd seen the cave, and they actually knew exactly where it was located in Utah, underneath an interstate. And this co-creation of the narrative, expanding beyond the initial post's content, was perfect for a blog format scary story. The audience became participants in the narrative, building on the underlying gag of the whole story, that we're all just reading random snippets of other people's thoughts, and it's ultimately very hard to determine what's real or not, especially when the internet allows for speedy world building and collaboration. Next up is Candle Cove. So I know this one breaks a few creepypasta conventions by having a known singular author, but it's just too good of a story to not include here, and it really highlights a lot of the elements of creepypasta that I really enjoy, so I want to talk about it. Candle Cove is a popular creepypasta about a fictional television series recollected by a number of posters on a childhood nostalgia forum. As the posters recall elements of the TV show, the things they collectively remember become more sinister, with characters featured clearly being unsuitable for children's viewing. I mean, Sesame Street has Oscar the Grouch. Candle Cove has a skeleton character known as the Skin Taker who wears the flesh of children over his naked bones. Pretty G-rated, right? Of course, if you tried searching for the television series Candle Cove in internet archives or even VHS tapes at the library, you'd never find it. The show wasn't real, but the feeling that something had disappeared from human record is what made the whole story even creepier. It gave the impression that someone tried to hide all of this, to wipe it off the face of the earth, which ironically is becoming a very real horror faced by filmmakers and artists in the age of streaming. Unlike most creepypastas that by their very nature evolved out of the contribution of numerous posters over time to sculpt and shape the narrative into its present form, adding, removing, altering details in the act of copying and pasting, Candle Cove can actually be traced back, like I said, to a single author. The author's name is Chris Straub. He's also a comic artist and an illustrator. He initially presented the entire story beginning to end in one single post, and then later published it in a bunch of short stories. Candle Cove was originally posted to a website for horror fiction in 2009, and the author himself is said to not be super approving of any adaptations or alterations of his work that came subsequently through the audience. But that hasn't stopped the internet from doing what the internet does, and of course, Candle Cove has mutated and taken on many forms over the years as a creepypasta. It takes on an epistolary...
I promise I speak English. College, if I can't speak. Epistolary form.
And no, that's not a religion. It is a form of writing. It basically means that it's made up of a bunch of correspondences between people back and forth that usually reveals the plot through those communications. Some books may do this by stringing together a bunch of letters or emails. And in this case, it's a bunch of people allegedly posting on a forum back and forth between each other that creates the whole plot and narrative of Candle Cove. Famously, Dracula, a horror classic, is written in this form, where it's a series of letters between a series of characters, and it unpacks the story in collections of epistles. So nonetheless, the content and form of Candle Cove really creatively play off the audience's fears about media and consumption, even if those fears are subconscious. It leans into the phenomenon of digimodernism, which means it's blurring the line between what's real and what's fictional. A lot of creepypastas actually reference existing television media, be it fictional television series like Candle Cove or real series like SpongeBob or The Simpsons. In any case, the porousness of the barrier between virtual realities and actual reality is exaggerated, continually allowing authors and posters to project themselves into the stories that they're creating in cyberspace. Wikipedia says this about urban legends. Many urban legends are framed as complete stories with plot and characters. The compelling appeal of a typical urban legend is its elements of mystery, horror, fear, or humor. Often they serve as cautionary tales. Some urban legends are morality tales that depict someone acting in a disagreeable manner only to wind up in trouble, hurt, or dead. Urban legends will often try to invoke a feeling of disgust in the reader, which tends to make these stories more memorable and potent. Elements of shock value can be found in almost every form of urban legend and are partially what makes these tales so impactful. An urban legend may include elements of the supernatural or paranormal. In creepypastas, the supernatural and paranormal appear a lot. Urban legends and folktales are often manifestations of a culture or group's deepest fears and anxieties. Unpacking a folktale can reveal insights into what culture is like, their values, and even their secrets. Stephen Coven, who's part of the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research, ISCLR, and editor of their peer-reviewed journal, Contemporary Legend, says that by looking at what is implied in a story, we can get an insight to the fears of a group in society. Urban legends need to make cultural sense. Some scholars even call folklore a mirror of culture. And what would be a better mirror for our global society than the internet? Pretty much as soon as Web 2.0 landed in people's living rooms, folks have gathered around communities and created communal spaces in cyberspace. Think like internet forums, message boards, social media sites. These were all the very human result of an interconnected global society. We all gravitated towards these spaces online because it mirrored what we had in real life, but better? Hundreds of thousands of communities and forums developed, focusing in on niche interests such as hobbies, media, fandoms, and among this connection and communion, the horror genre did what it does best. It adapted to technology and leveraged human invention to create man-made horrors beyond our comprehension. But the point I'm trying to make is the anonymity, the speed, and sheer newness of the internet provided and gave space for creepy tales to appear seemingly out of nowhere, spread faster than ever before, and feel eerily real. Ultimately, things on the web feel real because we've normalized an online existence. We know things on the screen aren't real, but they sure seem to be, and sometimes we do take it as real. Conclusion: we need creepypastas. Creepypastas need us. I was kind of speaking about horror as its own sentient entity, and the reason it feels that way is because it does take on a life of its own, especially in this copy-paste era. This is true of all stories, but these especially, that movement outwards and dissemination into the culture are essential for these texts. Part of how they evolve and how they grow is through this dissemination and through people interacting with the piece. Every time it gets copied and pasted, there's an opportunity for somebody to omit things, add things, change the wording, so they're constantly evolving. Much like oral and non-digital folklore, creepypastas are most effective when they actually leave the site of creation, where one might expect to see it, and end up in other places where one wouldn't expect to see it, such as everyday conversation, Facebook posts, and alongside other things that we consider to be real. As we saw with Ted the Caver and Candle Cove, sometimes these stories represent things that we as humans are inherently afraid of, and maybe expressing them in this way helps us deal with that fear, or maybe it just fosters it more, I'm not exactly sure. But either way, they're valuable forms of cultural expression, and I think it's really cool because they're mostly a unique kind of outcropping of the circumstances created by internet communities. They're some of my favorite pieces of writing on the internet. Sorry, Ebony Darkness, Dementia, Raven Way, because they're made and remade and remolded and participated in over and over when they're copied and pasted. Oral history for the 21st century, but weird, because we're all weird, and it's the internet. Anyways, y'all, I hope you enjoyed unpacking creepypastas with me. Just a short kind of video essay situation moment where I got to talk about things that I like. So what's your favorite creepypasta? You can leave a comment down below. If this is the type of content you want to see from me continually, also leave a comment down below and subscribe. And have a great day, everyone. Bye.